Welcome to this interview series. My name is Christina Theodoraki. I'm editor of Small Business Economics and Entrepreneurship Journal. And I have the great honor to interview today Shelby Solomon from the University of West Florida and Eric Liguori from Rowan University in the USA. Welcome, Shelby and Eric, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation and also for joining us for this interview series today.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here.
We're excited.
So Eric and Shelby is going to give us more insight about their article published in Small Business Economics. The article is published in open access in February 2021. The paper is entitled "The Effects of Social Spending on Entrepreneurship in Developed Nations." This paper is co-authored with Joshua Bendickson from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and Matthew Marvel from Ball State University. So starting my first question, could you please tell us more about your article and what is your article about?
Yeah, sure. So I can kind of tell you about our article and how we got into it through, I guess, sort of a thought experiment or story or whatever. But you know, coming up with this idea is we were thinking about, okay, well, what prevents a lot of people from getting into entrepreneurship? And, you know, what would scare me away from actually trying to start up a business? Okay. So if I start thinking about that question, I usually think, well, yeah, I'm kind of an iffy bet. And I have a family, I have a wife and a son, and you know, if things don't work out for me, I think I end up out on the street. And then I start thinking about the minutia, thinking, so, okay, well, I'm not going to be paying myself for a while. How am I going to eat? I don't have a lot in my bank account. There's also the problem of health insurance. What if I get sick or something? So, you know, you start thinking through all of these problems and, you know, it scares a lot of people off. It would scare me off, at least, thinking about, well, I'm not going to be cutting myself a paycheck for several years. How is this all going to happen? So we sort of we're thinking about it from that angle, but also at the same time, we're thinking about it from the angle of, well, you know, there's some people who, you know, approach entrepreneurship from like the opportunity side of, okay, well, you know, I want to find the lowest tax place I can go to get the biggest bang for my buck. You know, where am I going to get the most likely to reap the most of my profits and not be dealing with taxes and all sorts of other situations. So what we did is we sort of we looked into the theory behind each of these types of arguments and sort of pitted these two things against each other, okay, to see you know, what forces really draw people to entrepreneurship? Is it more the fear of failure that keeps them away and the possibilities of what could happen if they don't make it? Or is it the draw of the potential profits in the free market system? So in going about it through that process, we learned about, okay, well, there's market failure theory, and how market failure theory looks at this question would be, all right, well, if there's people that are scared out there, people like your Shelby Solomons of the world, you know, what can we do to sort of fix the game so that they're less scared? Okay, can we offer them things like national health insurance or unemployment benefits or food stamps or do all of these different things? So there's that argument. And then there's also the sort of more Austrian argument of, okay, well, if we want to pull people to entrepreneurship, we should be having the lowest taxes we can. If you look at, like, you know, social spending and a lot of these things, what they do is they increase the taxes. Somebody's got to be paying for them in some way. So usually they're in more higher tax economies. Okay. So it's like you can't have it both ways. All right. So what we did is we gathered all of our data from GEM and we analyzed, okay, well, what's the predictor of entrepreneurship in these economies? Is it the rate of social spending? And what role does that play? So we would look at, you know, countries with high social spending versus low social spending and try to predict the rates of entrepreneurship. And what we found, which was is supporting the Austrian perspective, that it seems that more people are driven toward in developed nations, at least, nations where there's lower levels of social spending, there's higher rates of entrepreneurship versus economies that have higher levels of social spending. So that's what we found, and that's sort of the idea behind how we got to putting this paper together.
Great, very, very interesting to see how what drives entrepreneurship, whether it is opportunity or the fears, and how we can support or provide any support to these entrepreneurs. We can ask also the question, why is this research, why is this article important, and what do we learn from this article that we didn't know before?
Well, one thing we learn is that, you know, you often think about like loss aversion really as being sort of your main, you know, like what is it about humans that we really know? And maybe loss aversion is something that I always think of as like that's human nature and one thing I can always bet on. But with entrepreneurs, I don't know, maybe they are a little bit different from a lot of others, and maybe it's chasing opportunities is what really gets them excited, and maybe that's that they're a little bit different than a lot of the rest of us, and it's not just how can they avoid losses that really motivates a lot of their behavior. So I mean, I think that's one really sort of interesting finding that we came across. And then also just the policy perspectives of, okay, well, if you want to encourage entrepreneurship, your best way to do it is probably through, you know, finding ways to not tax those people and make them, you know, be in a situation where they have the most to gain from their efforts. One thing we were kind of careful to discuss in our paper that we really want to make clear is that we're not like advocating against social spending. It's just saying that it doesn't encourage entrepreneurship. It certainly has its purpose, and it certainly is something that's valuable and that we should be spending our money on, but it's just not, you know, if you're trying to get entrepreneurs, there's other ways to spend the money.
You know, for me, I think it's about really just taking time to step back and look at the data across, you know, a number of years in a wide array of developed countries, and see what's working and what's not, and challenge critical assumptions. I think policymakers are always looking for ways to help move our societies forward. And I think that's a very nonpartisan statement, right? Everybody would agree that, you know, they want to help just see sort of positive social movement and economic prosperity. I think it gets a little bit dicier when you start operationalizing things. And one thing that the data here for me suggests is we need to do a better job of measuring outcomes, and we need to do a better job of asking the right questions. And so I think this is a step forward in starting to look at how we might be able to do better, you know, for a wider array of people over time.
Great. We can also ask how did you get this idea for this research? And I remember the personal experience of Shelby or having all these questions, reflections. But what was this moment that you decided like to go and shape it in a paper and do a research on this topic?
Well, it started a really long time ago when I was a grad student, actually, working on a seminar paper. And I was looking for some data on exactly what I was talking about, you know, ways to social safety nets, basically. And that's when I came across the OECD track social spending. Since that, though, I mean, I've read over, I mean, recently reading a book on like agricultural businesses. And I remember the guy discussing, you know, how to start up a farm business. A whole section on, well, I know a lot of you are going to get scared off by what you're going to do for your healthcare. It was like, okay, I'm not the only person who thinks about this kind of stuff. Here's someone else, but I mean, that was post since I've done this stuff. But yeah, it started as a seminar paper, really, and just trying to look for that data and see how I could answer that type of a question. I came from a background in economics, so those were the kinds of questions that I was interested at the time with.
Perfect. And where do you see this topic going forward? What are the new ideas? Where the next probably topics or themes, or based on the findings or others that you will be discussing, or you encourage to explore in future research?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I do qualitative research now. This is one of the last quantitative papers I did. So I don't know how much more work I'll be doing in this specific field, but I mean, I have moved on to other types of questions that can be answered through. Well, I do have some other work that's kind of similar, looking at, like, the situations like, well, is it a growing market that encourages entrepreneurship, or is it just changes? Like, could a bust also trigger entrepreneurship? So I'm also working on some other things that could be answered sort of through economic empirical analysis, sort of like this. But as far as this goes, in specific themes and things that could be done on this line, could maybe be through, I mean, what type of spending does encourage entrepreneurship? What would be one question. I mean, we looked at something that doesn't, but really, what does? Or is there a way? Is this the best thing to do? Or is it like nature, where, the best thing you can do to regrow nature is just to let it go and work on itself? Or is there some mechanisms and levers that we can pull to make people more likely to become entrepreneurs?
Well, when you think about that, for me, I want to know more about the role of entrepreneurship education. And what's maybe really worth noting here is we're looking at developed countries, right? So globally, we've got maybe the most entrepreneurially educated population of people included in sort of this data spread. But yet neither of the two variables around entrepreneurship education predicted much. And so, are we not doing a good enough job, or is what we're doing not producing the outcomes we think it does? Or do we need to ramp up the scale of it, or should we just give up and call the effort futile? Like, I think that we still, and lots of papers in the education literature and entrepreneurship still kind of lack that connection between education and intention and efficacy, and actually getting to behavior over time. And so for me, I want to see more work going kind of that direction, or at least I find that question interesting. And then I've become increasingly fascinated lately with work that is starting to influence public policy and starting to inform practice in real tangible and deliberate ways. And there's certainly different journals that have done a better job than others of facilitating some of that sort of translation, and we see a lot of journals in entrepreneurship really working hard to move that direction, but actually operationalizing, like, what are the levers that get the research we're doing today into the hands of policymakers in a way that's actionable and useful. That's the other piece of this when I think about what I want to do next after working on this. That's kind of exciting to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. The education variables did surprise us quite a bit, where it's like, holy smokes, how are these both non-significant?
Great. Actually, this is a great comment, and that transition also to my last question, because we see in universities, policymakers, what are your advices for practitioners to apply some of your findings, or to incorporate your findings in order to help these entrepreneurs?
Well, for practitioners, I guess my best advice, if I'm just going off the data and what I see with my paper, the thing would be just to discuss the upsides of entrepreneurship. All right. And what are the possible returns of playing in the free market, and banking on that these entrepreneurs, maybe they're not these loss averse type of people like the rest of us, and they're willing to go and head forward to chase their dreams and try to make things happen. I mean, very thankful that there are people willing to take those kind of risks, and we have a lot to benefit from them. Go for it, Eric. Yeah.
I was going to say, I'll come at it from a different direction, because I think, Shel, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I also think, if we get down to the practitioner level, there's a lot of policy implications here. Going back to, are we holding policymakers accountable for achieving the outcomes they set out to achieve and achieving the outcomes that we need them to achieve? And so I think there's a political action sort of component here too. Entrepreneurs and practitioners don't often have access to this wide array of data or know how to operationalize it. And so I think the more we can get to that translation piece, the larger public is going to be able to help push this narrative forward to policymakers who are probably in the best position to start affecting some real change here.
Great. Thank you very much for these comments. I don't know if you have any last comments or anecdotes or even suggestions for the readers that are going to read your paper.
Oh, well, just have fun playing with data and exploring. I mean, there's a lot of interesting questions to answer out there, and there's a lot of data between all of the stuff that GEM provides and the OECD and World Bank. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you can get lost in and really, let your mind run wild. So enjoy it, have fun. These are fun projects to work on always.
Thank you very much for all of you for the interesting discussion, of course, and all your insightful research. I really enjoyed the discussion with you today. I'm sure that our readers also will be extremely appreciate reading your paper and seeing this interview. So at this point, I would like to encourage all of our readers and fellows to download your paper, which is in open access from the website of Springer. And thank you again.
Thanks so much, Christina. This was
Thank you.